The Port of Los Angeles says it does expect shipping volume from China to plunge about 35% next week. The president addressing this just a short time ago.
You know, they're sending boats, the biggest boats in the world, carrying cargo like nobody's ever seen before. These are the biggest boats in the world, biggest cargo ships in the world. And they're coming and they're turning around in the Pacific Ocean. They're doing a big U-turn and going back because they don't want the goods because 145% tariff. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China. We're talking to China.
And we're joined now by the official who gave that warning about the dip in containers coming into the port, Gene Seroka, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. Gene, thanks for being with us. Can you just explain to us why you're expecting port volume to shrink more than 35% next week? Is this all tariff related? Is it all China, or is it other countries too?
Good afternoon, Brianna. It's all tariff related, whether it be China, which now, if you buy a product from there, it's 2.5 times more expensive than it was just last month. The 10% tariffs on all other countries, including those in the Pacific Rim that we trade with, are also expensive. So we saw some big companies bring inventory in over the last 9 months to try to build up stock. Not everyone had the ability to do that and store. Those small to middle-sized companies are really in a quandary right now. So we had about a 7% uptick in business here in the month of April. That's the end of the surge to pad inventory. The month of May right now, we're projecting next week's volume to be down by 35%. Ship sailings, 17 of them have been canceled out of a scheduled 80 or so. That shows that the drop will be precipitous and fast.
And I think you handle more container ships than any other port, right? So how long is this sustainable for port workers there in LA?
We're at a crucial time right now. We're the largest container port in the Western Hemisphere, 25 years running, a leading indicator of this great U.S. economy. And what we're seeing now is that dock workers, truckers, warehouse folks will be having less job opportunities beginning next week. If you're a trucker today, hauling 4 and 5 containers, beginning next week, you'll likely be just moving 2 or 3. Dock workers who've been getting overtime, working double shifts, will likely work less than a full work week. This will hit our local and regional economy immediately.
Gene, talk to consumers who obviously rely on these products coming in about what kind of products you're talking about, how this might compare to some of the shipping disruptions that they became familiar with during COVID.
Wherever you're watching or listening to this broadcast right now, likely you're looking or wearing at something that was brought in from overseas. 90% of trade moves on water, 45% of our business here at the Port of Los Angeles is with China, whether it be furniture, electronics, appliances, clothing, and footwear. The American consumer will be affected with less choice here in the weeks ahead on store shelves and online buying platforms, and likely prices will rise. These tariffs will be passed on in cost structure to the American consumer.
And there's a lot of talk right now by the Trump administration trying to create a sense of optimism that they're moving in the right direction towards coming to a deal with China. But until then, these tariffs, these 145% tariffs are still in place. Will shipping only rebound if there is an agreement that actually drops or largely drops the tariffs to something manageable?
That's my belief, Brianna. I worked in China for a number of years, maintained strong ties to the business community there. I'm on the phone with folks I trade with every night when I get out of the office or off the road into my hotel room. And what they're telling me is that even if a trade deal was reached at this very moment, it would take the shipping lines approximately 2 weeks to reposition their vessels and start loading up the backlog of inventory and container cargo, and then another 2 weeks to come across the Pacific here to Los Angeles. That's a month that we'll see to get this trade balance back in motion as we're used to seeing it.
And Gene, obviously it takes longer to get products on container ships to the East Coast. You're closer to when you're talking about Chinese products specifically. When are we on the East Coast going to start seeing a similar trend at ports here?
The impacts that we on the West Coast see usually lag by about 4 to 6 weeks on the East Coast, just because of transit time and order delivery processes. The same will be coming towards our friends up and down the Atlantic and across the Gulf Coast.
All right, we'll be looking to see how that does time out. Gene Seroka, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. During an interview that aired last night, President Trump was asked about the impact that his tariffs could have on his supporters. Here's what he said.
People are worried, even some people who voted for you saying, I didn't sign up for this. So how do you answer those concerns?
Well, they did sign up for it, actually, and this is what I campaigned on.
With us now is Mark Short. He served as the director of White House Legislative Affairs under President Trump. He's also former Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff. Mark, great to have you.
Thanks, Brianna.
And you're hearing Trump over and over blaming President Biden. But we should also remember that he bragged about the economy that he inherited. And he sort of was saying that it wasn't Biden giving him a great economy. He called it the Trump effect. He was saying that it was the markets and Americans excited that he was coming in. How long can this work for him, or does it even work for him?
Well, I think he's actually pretty good at being able to shift blame. I think the reality was that the markets rallied after his election lead into his inauguration day because they wanted to see a continuation of his first administration policies, which I think were really successful in deregulating the economy and cutting taxes. I think today's economic reports and data are pretty devastating, and I think only Baghdad Bob and Peter Navarro could explain this as positive news. I think it's terrible to see not just the GDP declining, but prices are going up. You're seeing stagflation for the first time since the Jimmy Carter era. And so I'm sure there's a desire in the administration to put this blame on somebody else, but I think that I think it's clearly a result of the trade policy. I think a lot of people want to see him go back to the first administration policies of deregulation and lower taxes.
Has he squandered his goodwill that he came in on?
No, I think he has enormous goodwill. I think he has enormous loyalty and support among his followers. I think one of the challenges, though, also, Brianna, is like, even if you agree with the trade agenda, I think it's been difficult to understand their simple explanation. Is this because of fentanyl? Is this because we're trying to lower trade barriers? Is this because we don't like trade deficits with other countries? It seems like the narrative continues to shift as the explanation for this. And so I think if there was a clear explanation, say, here's the pain we're going to ask you to go through in order to get to this result, that people would stay with him longer. But I think he still has enormous loyalty among his supporters.
There has been a refrain that we've heard from some administration officials, and now it seems we're hearing it from Trump, like, you don't need these cheap Chinese goods, right? He was asked about whether he'd spoken to President Xi. He dodged that, and he instead tried to stress economic difficulties that China's having because of the tariffs. And he said instead they have ships loaded up with stuff, much of which we don't need. Do you think Americans understand that actually if they look around their houses, maybe there's some wants there, but there's also a lot of needs that are coming from China?
I think it's a pretty elitist perspective. I think the reality is that Americans want to be able to purchase goods because we can afford to. It's a good thing that America is as wealthy as it is. It's easy in some ways to eliminate a trade deficit if you drive the economy deep enough into a recession and people can't afford to buy goods. So, we have this narrative constantly about what a trade deficit is, and it only looks at one half the equation. It doesn't look at the current account deficit and foreign investment into the United States. We have a trade deficit because Americans can purchase more things. And actually, last month, the trade deficit continued to balloon. And so, even with this administration's policies, that's continuing to grow. And that's in many cases because America can afford to.
35% drop in cargo arriving at the Port of Los Angeles expected next week. How much of an effect is that going to have politically?
I think it's going to be a huge effect in a couple of weeks, Brianna. I think that, right now you're hearing the numbers, you're seeing the numbers, you're seeing consumer confidence go down 5 months in a row. But if there's actually shortages of supply in grocery stores and other department stores, I think that's going to have a much different impact on voters.